Hey team, this is Grant Collins, and welcome to Basement Philanthropy, a place for people who do not want to wait until they are rich or retired to create good with their money, regardless of the amount. On this episode, we're going to be talking about why it's risky business to add surprises to your philanthropy. So let's get started. So how do you feel about surprises? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you like them when you're the one that's doing the surprising, but you hate them when you are being surprised? It's really a pretty mixed bag in terms of people's interaction and experience and liking towards surprises. And I'm pretty middle of the road, I would say. I love surprises when it's in the right area of my life and I've had enough food to eat and I've had enough sleep. I don't love surprises if those things aren't involved. And so it's a pretty mixed bag. And I can remember a surprise in my life that didn't really go so well for me. In 7th grade, I ran for student body officer for the next year. And I ended up getting elected. But unbeknownst to me, there was a bit of an initiation that would occur in the days following the election. So at what must have been 5:30 in the morning, I started to stir awake to the sound of something spraying. And I was so confused, but I felt something hit my face and I sat up and I realized that there was easy cheese on my face. That was the spray sound. And that my bed was surrounded by a bunch of people that I didn't know very well. And so I'm still kind of groggy. I've got cheese on my face. It smells. I hate the smell of spray cheese, by the way. And it just was multiplied by this experience. And I'm trying to recover. I'm kind of laughing. But in reality, I was super embarrassed. And the people that came, I would later become really good friends with, and my mom was in on the whole thing. So I was in really no big danger in terms of like having something terrible happen to me. But it just didn't really make my day go very well. I didn't get to shower. I smelled cheese for what seemed like the next week because it was all over my face, especially around my nose. And it just wasn't that fun. We ended up going to breakfast after. And, if I had had a little bit of an inkling around something or had something to prepare for, like, I just feel like that would have started that experience off a lot better for me than what happened. And that's why it's so risky to involve surprises in your giving. And I know that there is this draw to do so. It kind of allows you to be removed from the situation a little bit, especially if the surprise isn't like in person and you're leaving something on somebody's doorstep or someone's going to get something in the mail or whatever that might be. The reason why adding that element into your philanthropy or into your giving is so risky is because there's already so many factors at play when it comes to giving that they are not necessarily in an amazing place. And that is compounded when they feel like they're kind of out of control. And so when you have that factor, that set of factors in place, and then you add in this surprise factor with all these different elements for every different individual who's living on this planet right now, it really is just pretty risky. I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, and I'll call him George in this story. And George had an experience that mixed the two that really illustrates why it's so much better to be out in the open and up close and personal with your philanthropy. George is in his mid-30s, and he went out and bought a used car. And because of some dishonesty in the sales process, he ended up having a lot more of a financial investment into this car than he had originally expected, which hit his finances a little bit. Now, George was talking to his cousin Frankie and was explaining to him how things were going. And over the course of this conversation, Frankie had the idea of, hey, why don't I contribute or give some funds to George? And that way, it can maybe compensate for some of the things that are happening, and he doesn't have to be in such a bad financial situation. He also had this desire to, let's get other people involved. So he ended up getting the entire extended family involved with this fundraiser for George. Well, without Frankie knowing about it, George received some additional income and was able to cover most of the cost that he had experienced as far as the car, really without a problem. And so a couple weeks later, when Frankie presented George with this gift, and it was at a family gathering, George experienced it as pretty awkward because he had already taken care of everything, and he realized that not only did Frankie know about the situation that he had gotten himself into, but now his entire extended family knew and were aware of the situation. And although it was a nice gesture, it was something that really didn't align with George. And now he's got all of these unexpected things added on top of the situation. What if George wants to go on a expensive vacation in the next couple of weeks or months? Or he wants to invest in something bigger, or he wants to buy a surprise birthday present for Frankie's son or one of the other extended family members. Like, all of a sudden, there's this weird added expectation that was put into play that for George, as I've talked to him, really took away what he felt was his autonomy. And this relationship that he had with Frankie, it kind of put some distance in between that relationship and some other relationships that happened in the family, because some of the family felt a little bit coerced into giving, and they were in a tough financial place. And so the whole thing was just a little awkward. And when we view giving on social media and in TV shows or whatever we are viewing it from a third-party perspective, it's always this picture-perfect moment where they come home and there's this beautiful moment and they're crying and nothing's wrong in the world anymore. And the reality is, most of the time when giving occurs, it ends up a little bit like George if we add the element of surprise into the equation. So there are three things that I want to speak into as observations around what happened with George and what we can do in order to make sure that that isn't the experience that the people have that we are going to be involved with. The first thing is that Frankie, as the giver, needs to take responsibility for the experience that George is having as a receiver. We sometimes have this weird way of approaching giving that it absolves us from any responsibility because look how generous we're being, and the people should just be grateful. And while there is an element of humility that needs to be at play for the person that is receiving the giving in whatever form it takes, because the giver is actually doing the giving, they have responsibility for that experience and to clean up any messes that happened. So what that could look like for Frankie is, if Frankie and George have a good enough relationship, George can come to Frankie around what happened, and then Frankie can do some work around cleaning that up. Maybe going and talking to the family and saying, hey, I didn't know that George had already received this income, and so we're actually going to give the donation back if you want that money, if you want to receive it. Like, there are some things that Frankie could be around, or just, apologizing and seeing if there's anything that he can do with the extended family to clean things up. Like, there is a lot that can happen, and that is the greatest part of learning that we'll miss out on if we don't see ourselves as being involved and responsible for our giving. The second thing I want to speak into is that context changes so fast. Like, it wasn't long after George and Frankie had the conversation that George received the additional income that allowed him to cover the costs that would have put some significant financial burden on him had he not received it otherwise. And so if Frankie had known about that, then, this wouldn't have been a huge problem. And so when you are involved with giving, especially if there's a surprise element to that giving and you want to include that, make sure that you have something that's really close on the ground in terms of the person or the organization so that you can tailor that giving to the current situation if there's a significant time that lapses between the initial discovery and then going out and creating that. The third thing that I want to speak into is that the solutions that involve those in need or the receiver turn out way better usually than the solutions that we make up in our mind just from observation. And the reason why is because we're missing a bunch of context into the situation when we don't ask the person who is in need. We don't know the situation, and so we can make some assumptions that aren't accurate that can compound pretty quickly. We'll also miss out on opportunities to give that we would have never thought of or that would be more impactful for these people in their situation. And I have a little bit of an experience that I wanted to share around this last point around involving the receiver in the giving that just happened to me this last week, and it was so powerful and so moving. So I have always been interested in and excited about a store called Build-A-Bear Workshop. In fact, I have passed by the doors of Build-A-Bear since I was a little kid and always wanted to go in and to experience creating a bear from scratch and having it as something that could be mine. And I never got to do it as a child for one reason or another. And so as I was brainstorming around giving ideas a couple weeks ago, I decided that I could do something really cool with a Build-A-Bear. So I reached out to the people that follow me on Instagram, and I asked them if they knew of any organizations or little kids who could use a bear. And then I would then go out and create this bear for the person and then give it to them. So I received a message from my neighbor who said that she had a friend whose son was just finishing up treatment for brain cancer. And so perfect candidate, like it was going to be this really, really cool experience. They live outside of the normal city, and so it would be pretty challenging for them to get to this area as far as to Build-A-Bear themselves. So I decided like, hey, this is perfect. But in order to really make sure that I was on par with what needed to happen, I decided to call the mom. So I got the phone number of the mom after she said it was okay for me to reach out. And I talked to her. And first of all, getting involved in micro-philanthropy opens you up to the most incredible personal experiences. Like I would have never met this family or heard their story or been able to contribute in some way to supporting them had I not just been involved in looking for and creating space in my life to give monetarily back to the community. And it was just this beautiful experience to hear about what this family had been going through. It was just so special that the mother felt so comfortable sharing what was going on. But what was most impactful for me that ties back to that third point, and probably the biggest opportunity cost that comes with surprising people and not involving them, is what happened next in the conversation. We were about to get off the line, and the mom said something to the effect of, I don't know if it would be too much of a burden, but is there any way that you could do something for my other kids as well as the son that has brain cancer? And I was open to it. So I said, yeah, sure. Like, tell me more about it. She said, well, our son that has brain cancer gets a lot of attention and a lot of support, and he's the oldest, and he has two younger siblings that don't really get a lot of attention. And so when our boy with cancer gets attention on the back end, his dad and I have to kind of make up for that attention is basically what she expressed over, and explain to younger children why it's happening and how it's happening. And so really it creates a little bit of a mess, basically, is what I heard. And I would have never thought about that. Of course that is going to happen, especially with little kids. Of course, if their brother is getting all of this attention and the other people in the family aren't, that they're going to feel left out, or somehow that they don't matter as much. Like, so obvious, but I would have never thought about that. And so what happened on the back end is I was able to reach out to a bunch of my friends and say, hey, who wants to go to Build-A-Bear and build some bears for this beautiful family? And I got to go out with a friend this last week and build some. And then a couple friends are going later this week. And then we're going to box them off and send them off to this family. And it's just such a great experience. Just get involved with this. It's so good. There's nothing that makes my week or day better than getting involved and being able to matter in this space. So to close things off, I'm not necessarily saying that you can never have surprises in your philanthropy. Sometimes it's going to be appropriate, but the risk that is involved with that and the spacing away from the giving that you create by making a surprise or making it quote unquote anonymous, for me, it's just not worth it, because the impact is so much greater when you get to be with the person to discover what the real needs are and then to be able to fulfill on those firsthand. It is one of the most fulfilling experiences I've ever experienced in my life. Well, team, that's it for me. Let's go out into the world and create good with the money in our pockets together. Talk soon.